Welcome to another 3wells.co podcast. We've got a special guest today. I'm here with Ernest and Nurse Penny, who goes by Penny. Ernest will introduce our wonderful new guests this morning, but remember to go to after, before, not during, because we have too many great things to talk about, but go to 3wells.co for all the information you need and the products and services that you may be interested in, and where we focus on cannabis for people over 50. And the mantra and the reason we exist and our namesake is to be well, live well, and do well. So that's what we're all about. And we're going to get into all kinds of things today that are completely aligned with that and hopefully entertaining, educational. So Ernest, why don't you take us away?
Absolutely. And thanks everybody for joining us again. We have a really special guest today. One thing with 3wells is we love to explore topics that not many people seem to explore and things that people want to talk about. And we've got a special guest. We have Miss Penny Doherty, who is a Gynecologic Oncology Nurse Navigator at Northside Hospital Cancer Institute in Atlanta, Georgia, and also works with head and neck patients needing ONN services. She served as the clinical research director of the Southeastern Gynecological Oncology for 10 years and participated in the National ONS team to create core competencies for clinical trial nurses. Today, we wanted to have a conversation with Nurse Penny and discuss really a few interesting topics. One of those being living and experiencing joy again once you've been diagnosed and are going through your cancer journey, and talking about sexual health, well-being, and enjoying yourself and kind of getting back to a baseline as we're going through it. So,
hey, Ernest,
go ahead.
You got a future in newscasting.
Potentially.
That was so smooth. I bet you everybody's listening. He's like, is he formally trained?
No. I wish I was, but I hope I didn't butcher that intro. Penny, I'm going to let you say a few things and jump in. So Penny, welcome to the show. We're happy to have you.
Thank you. Lindsey Buckingham wasn't formally trained either, and look how well he did.
Wow. Okay.
I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. And
wow.
As was said, I'm a nurse navigator, also known as AONN, which is Oncology Nurse Navigator. And I've done this for 10 years. And I work with women who have gynecologic malignancies, whose lives are totally blown up. And if you're a woman or you know a woman, you know that we don't like anything blown up, that we don't want blown up. And I also work with head and neck patients. That's a similar group of people because they're disfigured in many cases, and they don't feel very sexy, missing their tongue or their voice box or part of their face. And yet they are the same people. The same as one woman said to me, they took out 8 body parts. I never heard anybody say that, but when she said that, it really struck me how profound it was to feel altered. And we don't want that. We want to be who we are and look in the mirror and be comfortable and recognize what we see. And we don't want to feel like we have walnut scars from the robot or big scars from the incision. So my goal is to help guide people back to where they can have lives feeling like themselves. If they have a partner, being able to express their sexuality with their partner, because even if people cannot do the exact same activities as they did before, they want to do activities that represent physical love to each other in some way. So that's my goal. I mean, I do a lot of other things as an oncology nurse, but if you don't have that sense of somewhere joy, it's not really worth being here.
Right. So, Penny, before we, those are, we got a lot, excuse me, to tease apart what you just said. Before we go too much further, An ONN. I want to come back to the beginning and then we'll jump ahead quickly. But an ONN, for those of us that aren't familiar with what an ONN does and your role, could you explain that to us?
For different disease sites, Oncology Nurse Navigator means different things. When you have populations that you work with, like I do, you become the spirit guide and the mom and best friend and the cheerleader and the hope giver, because both of those are very profound diseases that don't ever seem to have happy endings that we know of. Not that there are not happy endings, but it's not like breast cancer, where you see a beautiful movie star who said, yes, I had breast cancer and now I'm fine, which is not to minimize breast cancer, but ovarian cancer means Gilda Radner, she died. Pierce Brosnan's wife, she died. Head and neck cancer, he died, or he had no tongue. And that's pretty profound to come back from.
It is. And so you help not only with the what we would understand as a nurse's role, but you go above and beyond that into all the things you mentioned. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like that.
So in all of this, I don't. I'm trying to think of what direction you're going, but the thing I keep coming back to is the role of cannabis in all this, and because you see that as part of everything that you do, and it really leads to the question of why and what for.
Well, first of all, cannabis is not a gateway drug that people seem to postulate it being. Nobody ever went from smoking grass to shooting heroin, but people do go from opioids like OxyContin to being addicts, and then we give them methadone, and then they get addicted to methadone, and then we call them drug addicts. And we give these things out and wallpaper people's body with fentanyl patches, and then wonder why they can't think, and then wonder why they can't feel like themselves. Cannabis doesn't have that effect on anybody. I lived in Fort Myers for 20 years, and in the 70s and 80s, if you didn't smoke grass, you didn't really have friends. And every Saturday night, we'd kind of get together at somebody's house, and we were all professionals, something or others, nurses, attorneys, whatever. And nobody ever became an addict. People just got older and bought a condo and went away. But also during that time, it was very easy in Fort Myers. Sorry, Sheriff. It was very easy to get cannabis because there were retired people, and they were much more concerned with the size of the grouper that people were catching than they were with bouts of, square groupers coming into the Gulf. So it was very easy to get very high quality marijuana. And I worked with head and neck patients at that time, and then it was really gruesome. And they would bomb it through their trachs, which was horrible in many, many levels. So I would take them outside in the back of the hospital where we had a porch when hospitals had porches, and I would have them smoke grass in their trachs, and they stopped vomiting.
Wow.
And their wives would come visit, and they were able to talk to their wife without having such horrible rage that they were throwing things. And I was very intrigued by the therapeutic value of it. Unbeknownst to me, at that time, Dr. Raphael Meshulam was working in the University of Tel Aviv, developing an awareness of the endocannabinoid system, which is indeed a part of our body, a series of neurotransmitters, and matches up quite well with something known as the Polybagels Theory, which is a theory by Dr. Stephen Porges. And coincidentally, Dr. Porges' wife is working on, and has worked on, a really good therapeutic dissection of oxytocin, which is the precursor to having an orgasm. So all of these things kind of line up together. And I became very intrigued with that. And then I moved to Georgia, where cannabis is right next to witchcraft. And that was a very dormant period for me, because I certainly couldn't share anything like that with my patients. That is not to say that the hospital condoned anything that I worked at in Fort Myers. They just didn't address it. They were just happy that the patients were better. And that was a lot of things at that time. And so I became interested in it when my youngest son, who's a naturopathic physician, started working with patients at a hospital in Santa Monica, where they worked hand in hand with integrative and medical models. And so he took me to a lot of conferences. We went to CanMed, and when it was at Harvard, which was fabulous, and doctors from all over the world came. And I was just blown away by where they could do research, how positive this research was for seizures, for stress. Many NFL players came and spoke about how cannabis saved them from the bags of Vicodin that they were given when they had injuries.
Wow.
And, I'm not saying they shouldn't have Vicodin, but they described Ziploc bags of Vicodin. Here, take this, you'll feel better. And that monkeyed around with their entire life. And they were considered commodities. And nobody
The
wants
human
to be,
beings, not the Vicodin.
right.
Yeah.
And as such, they were treated as, we need our commodities to function optimally so we can win the game. So they talked about marriages being ruined and how they started to explore medicinal cannabis, and it changed their lives. And one of them, Eben Alexander, said, that saved my marriage. And that's a big statement. So I started exploring that with Christopher, who was my son, who was out in Napa and growing beautiful fields of marijuana and cannabis. I saw them. They were absolutely beautiful. And talking about how people were being treated with them. So I managed to find some medicinal cannabis and asked various patients what they would think about using it to stop the nausea, to stop the tremors of certain medicines, to stop neuropathy. And it was extremely successful. And then I got involved with the American Cannabis Nurses Association and the Society of Cannabis Nurse, the network there. And so I was already interested in the sexual aspects, because I really think that you can't be a whole person unless you can be a sexual person. And I don't mean that having sexual relations, I mean feeling sensuous. And for each individual, it means something else. So I started studying the sexual aspects of it, and I started to work a little bit more with that with my patients. And I developed, and the nurses were very uncomfortable, so I developed the presentation you may have heard called Sex, Chemo, and Rock and Roll. And it was to educate the nurses so that even though we are not sex therapists, they could at least say, let's talk about that, and then just listen to what the patient had to say. And the thing about neuropathy, and I want to give you an illustration about that, and it's really not meant to be funny, but this is the shape of a clitoris. What you see is this little niblet right here, but the organ known as the clitoris has tentacles of nerves that go all the way back to the vaginal fornices, or the ring that where you enter the cervix. And when you have neuropathy, you might see this, but what the patient is feeling is this horrible tingling, you sat on your leg too long kind of thing. And to me, cannabis seemed to relax that because it's smooth muscle. And when it relaxed it, the patients were able to not feel like they had wiring up their vagina. And that's a little difficult to discuss with a doctor, especially if the patient is 35 years old and the doctor's old enough to be her grandfather. And so that became kind of a passion for me. Not to mention the fact that we give people jars of opioids, and cannabis can create the same relief situation without everything that goes with opioids.
So Penny, let's get into some specifics around that. And I'll preface all this by saying to anyone who's listening, it's important you talk to your doctor and take all the right steps. We're not here to make medical recommendations or claims. We're having an informational discussion. So let's get into some of those specifics, Penny. Using cannabis for all the things, the neuropathy, the sensations, the relaxation, etc. How much, how, when? Now, I'm sure those are all big questions on people's minds. Can you give us some specific things that you've seen work? Not that you're recommending specifics for anyone, but things you've seen work.
Well, to begin with, I'm very blessed because I have a physician here at Northside who I'm very sure would be happy to come and talk on a podcast. Her name is Dr. Jada Reese. And Dr. Reese had a personal situation with her son having macular degeneration, and she was quite against cannabis. And then she was advised to take her son somewhere where she could get this. Fixed his eyes, he's fine. And
really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And what I do is I get patients referred to me. I explain to them what cannabis is, how much it costs, what the different cultivars are like. And then I send all their medical records to Dr. Reese, and she consults with them, which really explains why physicians should be educating themselves. They're not going to not do it because you say it's illegal in Georgia. And if all you do is give them, as a physician, a medical card, they're going to go to the store and buy garbage because the majority of what is being sold is useless because it's not regulated like any other supplement. And Dr. Reese works with a specific dispensary where she knows the quality, it's certified, the decarboxylation process is done properly, and the patients have been uniformly relieved. And so, having said that, I also kind of happened upon a particular dispensary in Asheville. And then the American Cannabis Nurses Association recommended a couple of dispensaries. And also, there's a few books now that are very good. Dr. Carrie Clark wrote a wonderful textbook, but Eileen Kuznicki, who is one of the nurses, wrote a book about cannabis, and I have bought several of them and given them to physicians. Please just read it. It's not a big book. Read the book.
It's not a big book.
Familiarize yourself with it, and I mean, doctors have read a lot of books in their training and they're finished with the books, but my doctors who are gynecologic oncologists hear women's issues. And they can't really discuss it as I can because they're doctors. So they can't prescribe. It's not a prescribable thing. I think in states where it's legal, it is, but in Georgia and other states, it's not. So they have to depend on Dr. Reese, who is anesthesia and pain management and helps the patients get connected. There's CBD, which is a very non-psychotropic cultivar of cannabis, but it works very well sublingually and also topically for nausea. Topically, it works very well when combined with a little THC in the vagina for vaginal stenosis, which women who have been radiated have a lot of vaginal stenosis. And it's a very relaxing type of substance, but you have to know what patients are taking. To give you an example, if you are taking turmeric, that's a very nice supplement, but it also causes bleeding. So if you're also on an anticoagulant, you might want to knock it off with the turmeric or you'll bleed out. And yes, I have seen that. And nothing operates in a vacuum, and anything that is efficacious interacts with something, or else it wouldn't work. So you have to know what the patients are doing. If they're on a lot of SSRIs, which are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, their sex drive just went into the toilet. Wellbutrin is wonderful for stopping smoking and making you feel good. Also doesn't do much for your sex drive. So you have to kind of know where you want to be with these. Wellbutrin and SSRIs don't necessarily interact with cannabis badly, but you're causing a turf war in the body. So, and I know all my doctors, so I can talk to them and say, could we maybe, and they're pretty open to it. And that's because the patients are intense, the doctors are intense. And so I just kind of work with them if they have issues about diet where they can't eat and they're what we call anorexic, they have no appetite. CBM works really well with that. So there's lots of different factors. There are terpenes. Terpenes are what cause things like flowers to smell, but they also change your brain waves. So if you can use the proper terpene with the proper strain of cannabis, you're potentiating a much better response without having a psychotropic effect. And unfortunately, to me, the best ratio is 1-to-1 THC to CBD, but you can't do that in a state where it's not legal. Right. So other than sending people to states where things are legal, you have to work with what you have. And that's where the terpenes come in. And all of that combined is very helpful for patients to calm down. The vagus nerve can make, which is the biggest, it's the 10th cranial nerve, it's the biggest one in your body. It can make you go crazy and have PTSD that won't go away. And PTSD is nothing more than a normal response to an abnormal situation. Nobody expects the doctor to go, you have ovarian cancer. The nurse will take care of it, talk to you. Not that our doctors do that, but to the patients they do. Because we think in a very large circular manner. And when you tell somebody they have cancer, when you scare them half to death, they're reduced to being under 10 years old. So you have to have an ability to level your brain enough to hear. And that's what cannabis can do. There was a patient, and I'm probably telling tales out of school, but this is not an isolated situation. Very sharp lady, really sharp, had smoke grass. She's a music therapist, brilliant, beautiful young lady. And she was in the hospital because she had a bowel obstruction that nobody could make go away. And all the nurses, who are excellent here, tried all their hoodoo, didn't work. So I said, fortunately, the nurse practitioners I work with are trusting of me. So I said, let me try something. And so I had some THC containing candy, and I brought her a vape, which I'm not in favor of vapes, but the woman was dying. All she wanted to do was have a bowel movement, go home and die. And because she was cannabis savvy, this wasn't going to frighten her. So I told her, here's your candy. Go in the bathroom, smoke the vape, see how you feel. Just put the fan on. And she did. And the next morning when I came back to work, she had cleared the bowel obstruction, moved her bowels, had a flat stomach, and could go home where she could die where she wanted to die. That's huge. That's huge. to me as an oncology nurse. And that's happened in different variations of that story a lot. And nobody is worried about people becoming addicts. They're worrying about palliating symptoms. And palliating means making it better.
So Penny, you've touched on so much, from decarboxylation to using CBD THC ratios, and vaginally, topically, etc. So you've covered so much. I feel like for the uninitiated, we may have left some people wondering, what are we talking about? So let's come back to a couple of things. Let's start with decarboxylation. Can you give us a quick, what is that?
It's a way of processing cannabis into being something that can be ingested and taking the acidity out of it. And it's a topic of great debate at cannabis conferences. I was at one in Las Vegas, and I was very impressed with the precision that people were discussing this with. And it was a very interesting conference. I was at my navigation conference, and my son brought me over to where his conference was, which was quite entertaining. And not that the navigation conference isn't, because it's great, but it was very like going to another planet for an afternoon. And the way cannabis is processed is very important. You don't want a bunch of junk in it. And you want it to have as little additives as possible and be grown in organic soil. And that sounds pie in the skyish, but I have an entire textbook which I show patients, which talks about what food looks like when it's organic molecularly, as opposed to what it looks like when it's genetically modified stuff. And it's quite profound. And that makes a big difference in cannabis as well.
Yeah.
So you also don't want people growing it with hallucinogenics in it, which is a whole nother topic, which I'm totally unfamiliar with.
So decarboxylation is the burning off of the acid, which enables the cannabis to have the hallucinogenic effect, right? So let's talk about the unfortunate situation some people find themselves in, where they are diagnosed with cancer, and then they begin their journey of healing, and they start to have these things that you're talking about, these neurological issues, nausea, the headaches, the whatever it may be. Where do they start? So what is step one in relation to cannabis, specific to cannabis, for them? What should they do? What should they be looking for? Should they seek someone? Should they read a book? Should they call you? What should they do?
In our hospital, I'm kind of known as the cannabis lady, and all the doctors refer the patients to me. Mm-hmm. I explain the different type of responses to different things. I tell them about Dr. Reese. I tell them about the cost. We talk about side effects, which with CBD are negligible. And I talk about the different forms, the topical, the vaping. And again, I'm not a fan of vaping, but sometimes when you're in big pain, I'd rather see somebody vape something than take an OxyContin. And I talk about that and about what foods to help to potentiate the cannabis, what aromatherapies to use. It's not just one little thing. And then I try to get them to see Dr. Reese. Eileen Kuznicki's book is good. It's kind of an all-purpose book. Another book that's fantastic was written by Bonnie Goldstein, who is a pediatric oncologist, a pediatric neurologist. And she's Cannabis as Medicine. I devoured that book. Fabulous. Now we have a lot of books because now people are open to things. Now we're getting information coming in. But start off with a little bit of a book. Start off with there's not too much that you could watch unless you watch a podcast like this, because nobody wants to expose themselves if they're a medical person. And theoretically, I need not to be discussing psychotropic THC, but I do, so that people understand. And especially in the over 50 group of people that I work with, most of them have either smoked grass or eaten brownies or something when they were younger recreationally. And so they're not as extreme in their responses. But I just start out explaining to them, and I have pictures of the HPA axis that I show them. And I talk to them about the endocannabinoid system and show them the pictures. And it's sort of like an evolution of learning and empowering the patients, because they're selecting something instead of having a doctor say, you must do X, Y, Z.
Right.
And again, not that that's bad. That's why we have our physicians. But there are other things that they can do, such as changing their body pH to an alkaline one. Everything is more receptive if you're alkaline, and that's so easily done. And talking to them about aromatherapy, which goes with cannabis, because that's what the terpenes come from.
So are you saying that terpenes change the alkalinity in our bodies?
No.
Oh.
But your body needs to be alkaline so that you're not having a turf war in your body when you're trying to digest, some fried something with, and also feel better.
Okay.
If you want your body to feel better, you have to let it rest.
How do you change the alkalinity of your body? I'm curious.
There are wonderful alkaline waters. You can alkalinize anything by putting a lemon in it. And if you don't like the sourness, you can put about a tablespoon of maple syrup in it. And I say maple syrup because it has a much lower glycemic index than sugar. And first of all, the big thing about sugar feeding cancer is not exactly true. The truth is, when you eat a lot of sugar, and we all do if we eat pre-prepared foods because they all have high fructose corn syrup in them, when you eat that, your body is saying, my goodness, I need to produce more insulin to get this sugar stuff into the cells. So you produce more insulin. Then you produce, in turn, more insulin growth factor. Then your body produces inflammation because it's working like a maniac to digest the sugar. When it's inflamed, it's acidic. It's not in an alkaline state. And you can help yourself by drinking alkaline water. Now Costco has fabulous alkaline water. Costco has everything. And you can eat foods that are alkaline, which are much better for you than acid food. You can stay away from dairy, because dairy works really well on cows who have 4 stomachs, not us. And we don't need a big curd in our stomach. There's just dietary modifications you can make that can be very delicious. And putting your body in an alkaline state means that your body is not in a state of inflammation, it's relaxed.
Okay.
That's big. That's very big, especially when you're being kind of deluged by chemotherapy, which is very valuable, but it's not really doing your body a lot of good in terms of putting it in a rested state. It's using
CBD is we've heard a lot about CBD being great for inflammation, whether you take it internally or topically. Talking about cancers and alkalinity and inflammation kind of all at once just a second ago, is CBD something that helps in that mixture as well?
Yes, but I don't mean this to be that funny, but you can't roller skate in a buffalo herd. You can't make headway.
I've never heard that one before.
You can't make headway in being better if everything else you're doing is not helping you achieve homeostasis. So you have to have a little bit of a cooperative effort in your life. And that's actually very therapeutic because people feel like victims when they have cancer. They're being treated. My patients have big long rods stuck up their vaginas and radiation delivered. And head and neck patients have big gaping holes and drains and flaps and things that are very invasive. So if you can create your body, if you can create a happy status for your endocannabinoid system, that's helping your body beef up its immune system. And our immune systems are everything, and we trash them every day. If we breathe and drive through Atlanta, it's like a low-hanging cloud of stuff, and it's not pollen. And if you do things that are in an enclosed place where people are smoking cigarettes, you're trashing your body, you're trashing your immune system. So you have to make an effort to heal yourself as much as you can. There are 4 patients I can tell you about. Granted, the caveat is that these ladies all had money to achieve what they wanted. They were all diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, didn't know each other. And when they chose independently to change the entire terrain of their body, which they did. Some became vegans. One went on a keto type diet, another Mediterranean. And they changed everything about what they wore, what they did. They didn't dye their hair. They didn't use weird nail polish stuff. They used things to bathe in. They're all 4 with us today, and they were diagnosed in 2011. And they did, as I said, they had the money to go out to Nasha Winters, who has a big spa in Arizona or someplace like that. But here in Atlanta, we have a very fortunate situation because one of our hospital systems, Piedmont, has an integrative component that all you have to do is prove you have cancer. It's free. Everything's free. And a good dietitian to teach you how to cook things that are proper for you, that are helping with your immune system. It just has to be an effort. But again, the effort gives a sense of empowerment. If I do that, I will feel better. That beats sitting in a chair for however many hours with chemicals that are weird colors being infused into your chest. Not that you don't need that, because you do, but you have an opportunity to become your own adjuvant doctor. It's one and only body we have. We might as well take care
of it. So Penny, you've covered so much, and I'm sure anyone who's watching and listening is, how do I get a hold of you or Dr. Reese, or can you give the people listening guidance as to that big step 1 to get some help?
They can always call me. They can always, let me give you a nice example. I had a patient who actually was one of the executives here at the hospital who had a friend who was a patient, head and neck patient in Tampa. And she wanted to know if anybody could help him because he was in a big fat PTSD funk and really was having trouble functioning. So I told him about different people I know who are therapeutic people down there, because that's where I come from, Fort Myers. And I wrote a text to Heather Manis, who runs the Cannabis Nurse Network, and she sent me back 7 links to cannabis practitioners in Florida. It's a big network of nurses, advanced practice nurses, and in some states, doctors who want to be able to be a therapeutic instrument for patients. And so I refer people out. If you contact either the American Cannabis Nurses Association or the Society for Cannabis Nurse Network, they both have websites, they will help you in 3 minutes. And they will be very happy to refer you to somebody. I know one of the people who attended a workshop, the CanMed workshop years ago at Harvard, is practicing with her 2 daughters and her husband at a cannabis clinic in Oregon. I've actually had people move out there because they had stage 4 something and were in big pain that they couldn't get rid of, and sent them out there to Janice Knox and her daughters, and they do a lot of presentations. In Maine is Dr. Dustin Sulak, who has 3 clinics and works with cannabis patients. And so in states where this is legal, you have a lot of people to refer to. People are always welcome to call me, and I can always send them to somebody I know somewhere. And I was at a conference in Columbus, Ohio, right before they legalized cannabis there, and Dr. Ethan Russo, who has done phenomenal research, was one of the presenters, and Dustin Sulak was another. And everybody wants to help. Everybody feels that this is a therapeutic modality, and there is help. You just have to be pointed in the direction where you can talk to somebody who is going to help you and do it properly. One thing that I found out was I had a patient who, head and neck patient, had a brother who lived in Florida, wanted to go to Florida and get THC because he was in big pain. And I thought, let me find out what the deal is here. So I called one of the dispensaries and said, what are the qualifications? Well, in Florida, you have to be a bona fide resident of Florida, have a Florida domicile documented, and a Florida licensed physician. So it wasn't just you're going to skip on down there and go buy some drugs at the cannabis dispensary in Florida. They're very, very particular about that. In Denver, when I was at a conference in Denver, you could walk into the dispensary and buy anything. It just depends on where you are geographically. And
Right.
Interestingly enough, when I was in Denver, I was at a nursing conference, and I went to the dispensary, and it was like being in a candy store. It was really kind of cool. And I've never been in a dispensary. I was just enthralled. But they had one section that was for patients. And I told them who I was, and I said, can I see what you're doing? And they let me, kind of observe and tell me what they did. And I've sent a few patients out there. And interestingly enough, when I was packaging the excess books I had at the FedEx in the hotel where the conference was, he asked me, the FedEx guy said to me, you don't have any cannabis in here, do you? And I've never been asked that before, but I guess because that is a legal state and people are going home, they're going to take things with them. So sometimes people have taken car rides.
Yeah. Penny, you listed off so many resources there. Can Ernest and I get from you some of those resources and put them in the links below when we post this?
Oh, definitely.
Okay. All right. We will definitely do that. Ernest, I know we're at time. Any other questions or things you want to talk with Penny?
No, I think we covered a bunch of very interesting topics. And I know we've had just our readers and audience members have asked some of these things. So Penny, I want to thank you for, first of all, what you do and helping to really advocate for cannabis. And secondly, on behalf of all of our listeners and audience members who are thinking the same thing, thank you for, continuously providing this knowledge and information.
You are welcome to share my contact information, and everybody I'm on LinkedIn and I guess Instagram as well. I'm not very computer savvy, and my son says, you're on LinkedIn. Okay. And actually, I've met a lot of people. There's a big advocate for cannabis in epilepsy, Mike Robinson, who is very much of an advocate and has drawn in quite a few people to share. And so that's a network. But LinkedIn is a good way to find me. You're welcome to my email address at work. And as long as you don't put cannabis in the subject line, you will get a response. And it blocks everything. And because we have firewalls for a hospital, and it's illegal. But I'm happy to point anybody in the right direction.
All right. So we'll make sure all that's in the links below. Thank you, Penny. All right. With that, Penny, like Ernest had said, thank you so much. Learned a ton, and thank you for sharing all those great stories and your time with us.
You're more than welcome. You guys have a great day.
You too.
You as well.
Take care.
All right.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.